The Arabian Peninsula in the 6th and 7th centuries was a melting pot of religious beliefs and practices. This region, far from being a barren spiritual desert, was home to a variety of religions, including animism, polytheism, Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism. Each tribe, community, and even family had its own set of deities and rituals, resulting in a mosaic of faiths that coexisted in relative peace, despite occasional tribal conflicts. At the heart of this pluralism were the many gods worshipped by different tribes. Some gods were universal in their appeal, while others were venerated by specific clans. The most famous of these deities were the three daughters of Allah, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, whose temples were major pilgrimage sites. Arabia was a land divided, not by empires, but by tribes. These tribes operated as independent political and religious units, each with its own gods, heroes, and customs. Religion in pre-Islamic Arabia was closely tied to tribal identity. Each tribe had its patron deity, a symbol of protection and power. The gods not only provided a spiritual anchor, but also served as mediators in tribal disputes, ensuring that justice was meted out in a world where formal laws were sparse. This tribalism also extended to sacred places. While Mecca was the most famous religious hub due to the presence of the Kaaba, other cities like Taif and Medina were home to their own sanctuaries, attracting pilgrims and traders alike. The Kaaba, a revered structure even before Islam, was not always a symbol of monotheism. In pre-Islamic times, the Kaaba was a central shrine housing 360 idols, each representing a different deity. It was the epicenter of Arabian religious life, a place where tribes from all over the peninsula would converge during periods of truce for trade, worship, and communal celebration. While the exact origins of the Kaaba remain shrouded in mystery, it is clear that by the time of Muhammad, it had become a polytheistic sanctuary. The 360 idols placed around the Kaaba represented the gods of various tribes. Hubal, one of the most significant deities, was believed to be housed inside the Kaaba and was particularly associated with divination. Pilgrims would often perform rituals, such as circumambulating the Kaaba and offering sacrifices, hoping to gain favor from these gods. Inside the Kaaba, there were not only idols, but also depictions of sacred figures from other religious traditions. Notably, there were paintings of Mary holding the infant Jesus and images of Abraham, suggesting a complex interplay between polytheism, Christianity, and monotheistic traditions in pre-Islamic Arabia. The presence of these symbols reflected the religious syncretism that characterized the region, where elements of different faiths often coexisted. When Muhammad and his followers returned to Mecca after years of exile, they confronted the Quraysh, the tribe that had controlled the Kaaba and its surrounding pilgrimage activities. The conquest of Mecca marked a pivotal moment in the religious transformation of Arabia. Upon his victory, Muhammad entered the Kaaba and, according to Islamic tradition, destroyed all 360 idols, proclaiming that only Allah was worthy of worship. This act was more than just the destruction of physical statues. It symbolized the eradication of the polytheistic past and the dawn of a new monotheistic era. However, historical accounts suggest that some images, like those of Jesus and Mary, may have been temporarily preserved as a gesture of respect, only to be removed later. With the cleansing of the Kaaba, Muhammad sought to unify the Arabian tribes under the banner of Islam. The once divided tribes, with their various gods and religious practices, were brought together in a new political and religious order, with Allah as the sole deity. This unification was not only a religious shift, but also a consolidation of political power that helped stabilize the region. The spread of Islam throughout Arabia was accompanied by the destruction of pagan temples and sacred sites associated with the old gods. Muslim armies, guided by the belief that idolatry was a sin, actively sought to eliminate the remnants of polytheistic worship. Temples dedicated to deities like Al-Lat and Al-Uzza were destroyed, as were sacred trees, rocks and beetles, stones believed to house spirits. This eradication was swift and thorough, with many pre-Islamic religious practices disappearing within a few years of Islam's rise to dominance. While the spread of Islam brought unity and order to the Arabian Peninsula, it also resulted in the loss of much of its pre-Islamic cultural heritage. Oral traditions, religious texts, and historical records that chronicled the polytheistic past were often ignored or destroyed, leaving historians with only fragmented accounts of this fascinating period. Despite Islam's rejection of polytheism, certain elements of pre-Islamic religion persisted, albeit in transformed ways. Rituals like the Hajj pilgrimage and the practice of circumambulating the Kaaba were retained but redefined within an Islamic framework. The belief in jinn, spirits that inhabited the world alongside humans, also survived and was incorporated into Islamic theology. These continuities suggest that while Islam marked a radical departure from the past, it also absorbed and transformed certain pre-existing beliefs and practices. In pre-Islamic Arabia, Allah was not the only deity worshipped. He had daughters, divine figures who played central roles in the religious life of the tribes. Al-Lat, one of the most prominent goddesses, was revered as a mother figure and associated with fertility, the earth and agriculture. Her temple in Taif, surrounded by lush gardens, was a major religious site. Pilgrims would offer sacrifices to her, in the hopes of securing abundant harvests and healthy offspring. Al-Uzza, associated with both love and war, was worshipped at a sanctuary in Nakhla, where 3 sacred acacia trees symbolized her presence. Al-Uzza's dual nature made her a powerful figure, capable of granting both victory in battle and success in romantic endeavors. Manat, the goddess of fate and destiny, was believed to control the length of human lives and the timing of death. Her worshippers would offer sacrifices at her shrine in Al-Mushalal, hoping to influence their fates or those of their loved ones. While Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat were among the most famous, they were far from the only gods worshipped in Arabia. The pre-Islamic pantheon included numerous other deities, each with its own domain and significance. Was perhaps the most significant of the Kaaba's deities. He was invoked during important decisions, and his statue stood inside the Kaaba itself. Pilgrims would cast arrows before Hubal's idol to seek guidance on matters ranging from war to marriage. Pre-Islamic Arabs also practiced astral worship, venerating celestial bodies such as the sun, Shams, the moon, Sain or Wad, and stars like Sirius and Venus. These heavenly objects were often associated with gods and played a central role in the religious cosmology of the region. Certain trees and stones, believed to be inhabited by spirits or gods, were also objects of worship. Pilgrims would leave offerings at these sites, hoping to gain favor or protection from the supernatural forces that dwelled within them. Many of the rituals associated with Islam today have their roots in pre-Islamic religious practices. The pilgrimage to the Kaaba and the ritual of circumambulating the sacred structure were established long before Islam. These practices, originally dedicated to multiple gods, were reinterpreted in Islamic theology as acts of devotion to Allah alone. Fasting was a common practice among certain pre-Islamic tribes, particularly during times of hardship or in preparation for important religious festivals. It is possible that the practice of fasting during Ramadan, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, was influenced by these earlier traditions, with some scholars suggesting a connection to Christian Lent. Animal sacrifices were a central feature of pre-Islamic worship, with pilgrims offering goats, sheep, and camels to the gods. This practice continued in Islam, most notably during the Hajj, when Muslims sacrifice animals in commemoration of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son. While Islam teaches that Allah is the one true God, the concept of Allah existed in pre-Islamic Arabia, albeit in a different form. The name Allah is derived from the Semitic root LH, which means God or deity. In pre-Islamic times, Allah was regarded as the supreme creator, but was not the primary focus of worship. Instead, people often venerated more immediate deities that governed daily life. In polytheistic Arabia, Allah was viewed as a distant figure, the creator of the universe who left the management of earthly affairs to lesser gods. Unlike the deities who were directly invoked for personal or tribal needs, Allah was considered too remote for regular worship. The Quran's cosmogony presents a creation story where Allah creates the heavens and the earth, the sun and moon, and regulates the movements of the celestial bodies. While unique in its monotheistic framework, this narrative bears similarities to older creation myths from Mesopotamia, where gods separated the heavens from the earth and organized the cosmos. The Quran's description of creation echoes elements of Mesopotamian mythology, particularly the Enuma Elish, which tells of Marduk creating the world by separating the waters. The multi-layered universe described in these myths, with distinct realms for gods, humans, and the dead, also resonates with certain aspects of Islamic cosmology. While Islam positions itself firmly within the Abrahamic tradition, tracing its lineage back to the prophet Abraham, Ibrahim in Arabic, and his son Ismail, it is important to recognize the significant influence of pre-Islamic religious practices on early Islamic development. The narrative of Abraham is central to Islam, but the religious landscape of Arabia before Islam also contributed to shaping the religious practices that would later become integral to the faith. In Islamic tradition, Abraham is considered a model of pure monotheism, a Hanif, or a person who rejected idolatry and worshipped only the one true God. Islam teaches that Abraham, alongside his son Ishmael, built the Kaaba as a house dedicated to the worship of Allah. This story provides a crucial link between Islam's monotheism and the Arabian religious heritage, as it redefines the pre-Islamic Kaaba, a polytheistic shrine, as the original center of monotheistic worship. The connection to Abraham also serves to link Islam to Judaism and Christianity, reinforcing the idea that Islam is a continuation and completion of earlier monotheistic traditions. However, in reality, the Kaaba had long been a site of polytheistic worship, and it was only through Muhammad's efforts that it was transformed into a symbol of Islam. Before the advent of Islam, there existed a small group of monotheistic Arabs known as the Hanifs. These individuals sought to reject the polytheism of their time and turn to the worship of a single God. Though their exact numbers and influence remain debated, the Hanifs are often viewed as forerunners to Islam. Their monotheistic beliefs, which may have been influenced by Jewish and Christian teachings, were later absorbed into the Islamic tradition. Muhammad himself is said to have been influenced by this group, as their rejection of idolatry aligned with his own revelations. The success of Islam in Arabia was not only due to its theological innovations, but also its ability to absorb and transform existing religious practices. Many of the rituals that define Islamic worship today have roots in pre-Islamic customs. One of Muhammad's most significant acts was to transform the Kaaba from a polytheistic shrine to the central sanctuary of Islamic monotheism. While the Kaaba had long been a center of pilgrimage for various Arabian tribes, it was now redefined as the house of Allah, built by Abraham and Ishmael for the purpose of monotheistic worship. This transformation was not just a physical act of cleansing the shrine of idols, but also a symbolic gesture that reoriented Arabian religious life around the worship of a single, all-powerful God. Islam did not completely discard pre-Islamic rituals, but instead reinterpreted them within a monotheistic framework. The annual pilgrimage to the Kaaba was already an established practice before Islam. However, Islam redefined the pilgrimage as an obligation to Allah alone, stripping it of its polytheistic elements and aligning it with the story of Abraham. Tawaf, circumambulation of the Kaaba. The act of circumambulating the Kaaba was originally a pagan practice. Muslims today continue this ritual during the Hajj, but it is performed solely in the worship of Allah. Pre-Islamic Arabs practiced animal sacrifice as part of their worship, offering animals to various gods. In Islam, the sacrifice performed during Eid al-Adha is a commemoration of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son for Allah. This reorientation from multiple gods to a single omnipotent God is a key feature of how Islam absorbed and transformed earlier rituals. Fasting as a religious practice predates Islam, and some scholars suggest that it may have been influenced by both pagan traditions and Christian fasting rituals, such as Lent. In Islam, fasting during the month of Ramadan became one of the 5 pillars, a sacred act of worship that emphasizes self-control and devotion to Allah. The concept of fasting as a means of spiritual purification, while transformed by Islam, has deep roots in pre-Islamic Arabian religious customs. The rise of Islam involved more than the outright rejection of polytheism. It was a process of adaptation and integration, where certain elements of pre-Islamic religious life were absorbed into the new faith. This adoption helped ease the transition for many Arabian tribes, allowing Islam to rapidly spread across the peninsula. The belief in jinn, supernatural beings that exist in a parallel world to humans, was widespread in pre-Islamic Arabia. Jinn were thought to inhabit desolate places, and they could be either benevolent or malevolent. While the Quran firmly establishes that jinn, like humans, must submit to Allah, their inclusion in Islamic theology reflects a continuity of pre-Islamic beliefs. The jinn, therefore, represent one of the most obvious examples of how Islam incorporated elements of earlier Arabian religious thought. In pre-Islamic Arabia, certain stones and trees were considered sacred, often believed to house spirits or gods. Although Islam condemned the veneration of objects as idolatry, the respect for natural elements like stones and trees persisted in certain Islamic practices. For example, the black stone, Al-Hajar al-Aswad, embedded in the Kaaba, is an important relic in Islam. While Muslims do not worship the stone, it is kissed or touched during the Hajj pilgrimage, continuing a tradition of reverence for sacred objects. Before Islam, Allah was recognized as the creator God, but he was not the exclusive focus of worship. In the polytheistic environment of pre-Islamic Arabia, Allah was regarded as the supreme God who created the world, but the day-to-day worship of Arabs was directed more towards other gods and goddesses, who were seen as intermediaries between humans and the distant Allah. The Quran explicitly challenges this notion, emphasizing that Allah does not need intermediaries, and that He alone should be worshipped. This monotheistic revolution was a direct response to the polytheism that had dominated Arabian religious life for centuries. Mentions of Allah can be found in inscriptions from the ancient kingdom of Lihyan, dating back to the 5th century AD. Allah was worshipped as a high god in the Arabian Peninsula, but unlike the gods of neighboring civilizations, He was not the sole object of devotion. Instead, Allah was part of a pantheon of deities, similar to how other cultures in the ancient Near East worshipped a supreme god alongside a host of lesser gods. Scholars have pointed out similarities between Allah and other high gods in the Semitic world, such as El in Canaanite religion. Like Allah, El was a distant creator god, and worship was often directed towards his children or lesser deities who played a more active role in human affairs. This connection suggests that the concept of Allah in pre-Islamic Arabia may have been influenced by wider Semitic religious traditions. The transition from polytheism to monotheism in Arabia was not immediate, nor was it entirely peaceful. Muhammad's revelations marked a radical departure from the religious norms of the time. His message challenged the existing power structures, particularly those of the Quraysh, the tribe that controlled Mecca and its lucrative pilgrimage trade centered around the Kaaba. One of the central themes of the Quran is the insistence on the oneness of Allah. The term Tawheed refers to the absolute monotheism that forms the core of Islamic belief. This doctrine was revolutionary in a society where polytheism and tribal deities had long been the norm. The Quran repeatedly condemns the worship of other gods, and emphasizes that Allah alone is the creator, sustainer, and ruler of the universe. Muhammad's role as a prophet was to guide his people away from idolatry and back to the worship of the one true God. His revelations not only introduced new theological concepts, but also provided a moral and legal framework for society. By rejecting polytheism and establishing a monotheistic faith, Muhammad reshaped the religious and political landscape of Arabia. As we have seen, the story of Islam's rise is not one of simple rejection, but rather one of transformation. Islam emerged from a religiously diverse environment where polytheism, animism, and monotheistic traditions all coexisted. The message of Islam radically altered the religious landscape of Arabia, but it also incorporated and reinterpreted many of the rituals and beliefs that preceded it. Islam's ability to absorb and transform pre-existing religious practices was key to its rapid spread. By redefining the Kaaba as the center of monotheism, reinterpreting the Hajj pilgrimage, and incorporating elements like fasting and animal sacrifice, Islam created a religious system that resonated with the people of Arabia while also challenging the polytheism that had dominated the region. The polytheistic origins of Islam offer us a fascinating glimpse into the complex and dynamic religious history of the Arabian Peninsula. While Islam ultimately established itself as a strictly monotheistic faith, the echoes of its polytheistic past are still present in many of its rituals, symbols, and practices. Understanding this history allows us to appreciate the rich tapestry of religious traditions that contributed to the emergence of one of the world's major religions.